Look closely at this reaction. When highly volatile chemicals interact, the margin for error shrinks to zero. In a professional setting, a single miscalculation with sodium hydroxide or thioglycolate can cause immediate, severe chemical burns. Preventing this specific type of physical, recognizable harm is the foundation of occupational licensing. The state steps in to ensure practitioners handling dangerous materials or sharp tools meet a strict threshold of safety. This legal strain traces back to the 1889 Supreme Court decision in Dent v. West Virginia. The court affirmed that states have the right to regulate certain professions, specifically to protect the physical welfare of their citizens. This chart illustrates the explosive growth of these regulations. In the 1950s, only about 5% of the American workforce required a license. Today, that number has surged to nearly 25%. As the requirements expanded across dozens of industries, society began to rely on formal, state-issued credentials as a guaranteed proxy. We assume a framed license means the person holding it is demonstrably safe and highly qualified. Yet the rapid expansion of these mandates has exposed a critical divergence. The operational reality of how state boards design their licensing exams has drifted far away from that original mandate of public protection. For high-stakes trades like cosmetology or barbering, the true barrier to entry is rarely a candidate's inability to safely handle chemicals. Instead, the final hurdle has quietly shifted into navigating an artificial, complex academic gauntlet. The College of Humanization research team at Tran University has developed a framework to evaluate this disconnect. Their research isolates the exact point where workforce regulation detach from practical safety. Consider the traditional written state board exam. Trade schools spend hundreds of hours training students in hands-on clinical environments. Then the state measures that physical competence in rows of desks with paper and pencils. This mismatch in assessment methods introduces a severe psychometric flaw known as construct-irrelevant variance, or CIV. Construct-irrelevant variance occurs when variance in test scores is caused by factors entirely extraneous to the actual professional skill being measured. It means the test is grading the wrong skill. A candidate might flawlessly execute the EPA-registered disinfectant immersion process for non-porous tools on the salon floor, but on the exam, they are suddenly required to decode indirect wording, complex syntax, and double negatives to prove it. This linguistic complexity functions as reading trickery. It artificially penalizes highly competent practitioners whose primary language is not English, or who simply struggle with convoluted academic test formats. When a licensing exam relies heavily on lexical rarity and confusing sentence structures, the resulting score is invalid. It is measuring reading comprehension, completely missing the state's mandate to measure public safety. The critical competencies in the beauty and trade sectors are not abstract theories. They are intensely physical, involving biological risks and precise tactile skills. State boards exist to prevent present and recognizable harm. A straight razor shave carries the immediate risk of blood-borne pathogen transmission. Mastery of blade handling and blood spill procedures is non-negotiable. A valid competency-based assessment must evaluate whether a candidate can actually execute these critical fail points safely in a real-world performance context. This target represents our intended measurement, safe practice, but linguistic gatekeeping acts as an external force. When questions are loaded with complex syntax and ambiguity, the exam's measurement gets pushed far away from the intended construct. Testing vendors often claim there are no trick questions on these exams. However, leaning heavily on except clauses and highly subjective best or worst scenarios perfectly mimics the effect of trickery, confusing the applicant. Then there is lexical rarity, the deliberate use of uncommon vocabulary. Swapping a simple phrase like find out for the word ascertain creates an immediate artificial barrier, particularly for English learners. For individuals experiencing high test anxiety, the assessment environment degrades into a punitive trap. Their mental energy shifts entirely from recalling safety protocols to decoding the structural puzzle of the question itself. If a test item forces a candidate to fail because they misread a double negative, it has not measured their ability to sanitize a workstation. It is a direct failure of the assessment's primary regulatory directive. To understand why capable adult learners suddenly freeze during these exams, educational psychologists look to cognitive load theory. This gauge represents human working memory. It has strict biological limitations. At any given moment, a person can typically only process between 3 and 7 discrete chunks of information. When a student takes an exam, part of that memory is consumed by intrinsic load. This is the inescapable difficulty of the trade itself. Like recalling the stages of a chemical reaction, it legitimately occupies mental space. But poorly designed tests introduce extraneous load. This is the wasted mental energy required to decode confusing instructions, rare vocabulary, and twisted sentence structures. It rapidly consumes the remaining working memory. This creates a split attention effect. The gauge overflows, leaving zero capacity for germane load, the actual cognitive process of retrieving stored knowledge and applying it to the problem. The student knows the answer, but their overloaded brain cannot access it. An expert board member reviewing these questions relies on years of established mental schemas, allowing them to bypass this overload. But the licensing exam is built for novices who do not yet have those organized mental structures. This triggers the expertise reversal effect. Test items designed to seem rigorous and precise to a veteran practitioner actually induce a complete cognitive collapse in a novice, obscuring their true, hard-earned competence. This psychometric failure doesn't happen in a vacuum. It triggers severe macroeconomic consequences across the labor market, driven by delayed licensure and repeated exam failures. The beauty and trade sectors have historically functioned as vital economic engines. They offer reliable pathways to the middle class for underrepresented populations, including women, career changers, and immigrants. But artificial language hurdles actively sever these pathways. Research shows that strict English proficiency requirements and complex wording on written exams specifically decimate workforce entry for non-native speakers, such as Vietnamese manicurists. The financial math of a poorly designed exam is brutal. When state boards report 20 to 40% failure rates for first-time test takers, they are triggering compounding financial distress for thousands of individuals. We can track this exact financial cascade. A flawed exam directly causes delayed licensure. That delay immediately splits into two distinct economic penalties: broad deadweight loss to the economy and acute debt accumulation for the student. While waiting weeks or months to retake the test, these students are legally barred from working in their field. Meanwhile, interest continues to accrue on average student loan balances of $10,000 to $14,000. The final consequence of this constrained labor supply is incumbent rent seeking. Existing salon owners and established businesses command higher prices and earn artificially high profits simply because capable competitors are locked out. A test structured this way ceases to be a safety check. It functions as a mechanism for occupational closure, restricting market competition while forcing vulnerable populations into systemic, inescapable debt. Fixing this requires an ethical mandate for reform, guided by the joint psychometric standards established by the AERA, APA, and NCME. These standards dictate that fairness is a fundamental validity concern. Every single candidate must be given a comparable opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge, entirely free from construct-irrelevant barriers. By stripping away linguistic obstacle courses, regulatory boards can open accessible pathways to professional licensure that evaluate actual competence. The core of this humanized framework is the plain language mandate. It is a non-negotiable standard for valid assessment design. Test developers must use active voice, shorter sentences, and eliminate complex jargon unrelated to physical safety. Swapping a legalistic term like admissible for allowed reduces extraneous cognitive load, letting the student focus on the underlying safety role. Removing complex syntax and trick questions does not lower the standard of the profession. It is a vital, necessary increase in measurement precision and basic fairness. This humanization framework must also extend to broader regulatory compliance design. States need to move away from rigid, one-size-fits-all hourly mandates that trap students in classrooms. Recent state-level reforms prove this is possible. Several legislatures have successfully reduced base curriculum hours and eliminated unnecessary specialty licenses, effectively lowering the overall regulatory volume without compromising safety. The solution is a risk-based tier system, aligning government intervention with actual physical danger. The base accommodates low-risk services like blow-dry styling. The middle requires safety registration for medium-risk makeup artistry. The apex, full licensure, is reserved for high-risk services like chemical peels or straight razor shaves. This tiered approach strips away anti-competitive barriers. It provides entry-level workers with coordinated, debt-free pathways to begin earning immediately, while still allowing them to upskill into more complex services later. To achieve this, the entire tone of state assessments must shift. Boards must transition from punitive gatekeeping to the empathetic validation of a citizen's fundamental right to work. True regulatory rigor is defined by the precision with which an exam identifies genuine risks to the public. Ultimately, clarity protects the consumer better than confusion.